Hello everyone, this is Unit 4 of AP Euro, and this is perhaps the beefiest slideshow I've had yet, so I'm just going to go straight into it. Table of contents, we're going to be covering the Scientific Revolution and the Enlightenment. There's a chance that you're watching this where it's just the cut down version to only the Scientific Revolution. I would also recommend watching the Enlightenment one, and also the politics one. Okay, so for Scientific Revolution, there's two key pieces of context that you need to know. Hermeticism is the belief that the world is God, God is magic, therefore the world is magic. And this would have alchemy and stuff in it. Hermeticists studied the world and the stars and thought, we can figure everything out with math. And this was all scientific thinking, and this was all proto-science. And also exploration. Explorers needed ships and math knowledge in order to sail. They needed specific instruments like the compass, and they contributed to the scientific revolution through all of these contributions. And people wanted to control the natural worlds. So here are some of the scientific revolution thinkers. So the first one is Vesalius. His big thing was anatomical studies. He dissected human bodies. It was unethical. Definitely. And this was the start of the progress versus ethics debate. And also the start of progress in science versus Christianity. Like people being dissected obviously went against the views of the church, so science and religion started clashing from here. He discovered a lot of, for how horrible his experiments were, he did discover a lot of things about the human body. And he discovered it, and he published it for everyone to know. And he helped William Harvey see later make his discoveries. And this is something you can remember by anatomical. This was Leonardo da Vinci made this, but he understood. He studied the anatomy of humans. William Harvey. So he is another anatomical studier. And he was also messed up with some of his studies. He had the blood vessel theory, which said that there was only one blood flow through the entire body rather than multiple, as was thought before. He discovered there was only one blood flow. And he took it from the idea that there were muscles veins, so there were veins that were to muscles, and involuntary veins. So veins that went to things like breathing and stuff that is subconscious to us. And he took it from that to modern theory. And how I would remember him, Harvey equals heart. And I would also remember Vesalius by thinking veins or vessels, thinking anatomy, and think of Harvey as a heart, because blood flow, heart. You're an AP Euro, you know this stuff. The third person is Paracelsus. So he wasn't very medicinal, but he was more of a philosopher. He thought that people are smaller versions or microcosms of the universe, and he thought that our human mind resembled the universe. For the first scientific thinker, we have Descartes. He believed in two important things here. Dualism. He believed that there was a separation between the body, which is the physical, and mind, which is the mental or the spiritual side of us. And he was deductive, rational, he was a skeptic, and he had this kind of crisis in his life where he was doubting everything. And the way that he went about dealing with that, he was doubting the existence of everything and anything. And the way that he went through that was that, and started figuring things out, is that he questions, the first thing he questioned was, am I real? And he thought, I am real because I can think. Cognito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. So he kept on thinking about stuff using that process, this deductive reasoning process. Secondly, we have rationalism, and that's thinking about things through a rational, reasonable sense. And skepticism, he was a big advocate for that. And skepticism, which is not believing everything that you see and like kind of like not automatically believing in a God, but rather having to like thinking it through. And some of his books were placed on the index of forbidden books because they were skeptic. And yeah, so the reason was the primary source of knowledge rather than God. And he questioned everything he could, so that obviously landed on the index of forbidden books. So for the second scientific thinker, we have Francis Bacon. He was observation. Me and my friend joked that he was a stalker because he was observation. He believed that observation was the way to scientific discovery. And he laid the foundation for the scientific method, but he didn't really create it. He kind of created like a prototype of it. For the third one, we have Benedict de Spinoza. So he had this belief which was akin to Hermeticism, which said, it was called pantheism or monism, and he said, we are the universe, God is the universe, therefore we are a part of God. And this wasn't very popular. His more significant contribution was rationalism and empiricism, where he said that we can rely on both reason as well as sensory experience. We can rely both on using our brains and using our eyes. And this was, he emphasized the way to achieve happiness was through reason. For the fourth scientific thinker, we had Pascal. And there was a growing divide between science and religion, especially as we see later on. The Pope started getting flamed and roasted by Galileo, so there's a growing divide. So instead, what Pascal wants is for that divide to be bridged. And he wants to unite religion and science instead of having them divided. So for the first of our astronomers, we have Copernicus. Copernicus is, so some context for you. People had interpreted from the Bible before this, clergy and popes and believers had interpreted from the Bible before this, that Earth was the center of our solar system and the sun orbited the Earth. I think it was called geocentrism. And what he discovered is that that wasn't true. The fact of the matter is that the sun is the center of the universe and the Earth orbits it. That's what he said. And this was called heliocentrism. So he waited to publish his findings on this right before he dies, like the year of his death, because he was afraid of being persecuted by the church. So for our second astronomer, we have Tycho Brahe. This was another very interesting man. He had this observatory which he built, and he collected all this observations and data on our solar system, which paved the way for others, specifically Kepler, to discover things about our universe. And this guy, Johannes Kepler, he set up an observatory. Excuse me, this slideshow is wrong. What he did was he discovered a few important facts. So let me update this for you. Thank you for your patience, and we're going to go right back into this now. So he piggybacked off of Brahe. He was an intern. He was kind of like an apprentice to Brahe. And then he was an intern or apprentice to Brahe, and then he took his data and observations and made them into the laws of planetary motion. If you had to point to one, then I would definitely say elliptical orbits. That's the easiest one to understand. That's the only one I really understand. It's the idea that instead of like planets moving in a perfect circle, they move in these weird ovals instead. And the second law says that planets move faster when they're closer to the sun and slower when they're further away. Third one is the law of harmonies. I don't understand this. I spent a good few minutes trying to understand what it means, and I couldn't really understand it, but you don't need to know it for AP Euro purposes. Maybe if you're going to become an astrophysicist or something, you'll need to know it. Speaking of physicists, first one is Galileo. He was a trailblazer. He used the telescope to discover things, and things that he discovered were sunspots. He discovered that there were these little explosions taking place constantly across the sun by just looking into the sun with a telescope. And this debunked the idea that the sun was made out of heavenly perfect matter. And that was a big discovery. The second thing is inertia. Others believes that God made things move, and then Galileo proved somehow that inertia made things move. And inertia is kind of this like force, I'm not really sure. Third thing, this wasn't something they discovered, but he beefed with the Pope. He clowned on the Pope, and because the Pope was kind of like on the edge of whether or not he believes the scientific discoveries. So he clowns on the Pope, and the Pope starts rejecting his ideas because if someone's, acting hostile towards you, you're not gonna accept their ideas as much, right? So the Pope starts acting hostile towards the scientific community because of this. And the second physicist, perhaps the most important person in perhaps the most important scientist in the entire course, Newton, he was the bridge between the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. He discovered so much stuff. He made calculus. There was an epidemic going around, so he had to stay inside for a bit, and while he was staying inside, he made calculus, much to the dismay of calc students, which I am soon to be one of. He also made the law of universal gravitation, which explains why everything moved, and he made his 3 laws of motion. He didn't make new ideas, but he kind of caused the creation of new ideas, the most important one being the Newtonian world machine. He said that it spawned from him making laws. Because he was making laws, his followers were like, okay, we can define everything with science through laws. So he makes this idea of the Newtonian world machine spawns in. And it said the universe is just a machine. It has rules, it has laws, and we can discover everything through it. So it's secular. Instead of God being the rule maker, the rules are made. The rules have already been made by the universe. There are physics, there are all these explanations. And as far as astronomy, he pieced together the ideas of Copernicus and Kepler and Galileo through Principia, his masterwork. Curl de Femme. Increased reason means that women's right will be more recognized, right? No. Women are marginalized even further because anatomical studies by Vesalius, for example, discover that women have smaller skulls, so meaning less room for brain, and wider hips, meaning more adept to childbearing. So that made people saying that they were being rational, and definitely people who wore glasses and were like, actually, they said that rationally speaking, because women have smaller skulls, that means that they are dumber. And that made it so that they were kind of even more marginalized to just birth children. And they did not get any progress towards having the ability to have jobs or rights. Female scientists were also marginalized. First one being Margaret Cavendish. She was a natural philosopher, and she made works on nature and biology under her husband's name, and she was turned down from the English Royal Society, who we will learn more about later. And how I would remember her is her name, Margaret Cavendish, Petri dish, biology. Get it? Second one was Maria Marion. She was a insect studier, so she went to South America to study insects and their anatomy, and this was definitely trailblazing for women. No woman had done this before. and how you should remember Maria Marian. Kind of sounds like Marian Marian. And Maria is a very common South American name. For the third one, Maria Winkelmann. She was the wife and mother of astronomers. So she kind of helped them out and worked with her husband and son on astronomy. And she tried to go to the Berlin Academy to learn more about it and share her ideas, but she was turned down because she was a woman. And how I would remember her is Winkle, Winkle, Little Star, because she was an astronomer. Get it? So religion around this time was generally hostile towards science. And from the get-go, Protestants were hostile. They were like, no, we reject it. If it's not in the Bible, if it's contradicted by the Bible, then it can't be true. The Catholics said, maybe it's true, we just don't really know for sure yet. And then Galileo clowns on the church and the Pope, and then they start acting hostile towards science. And a lot of the scientific books are placed on the index of forbidden books. Ignore the voice crack. Major scientific groups are the English Royal Society, who are privately owned. They were not chartered by the government, they were not government owned. And they kept pamphlets from non-members. If you weren't a part of the English Royal Society, you wouldn't get their pamphlets, you wouldn't get their scientific discoveries. And they were anti-government. The French Royal Society was government-owned, and it made magazines for public consumption. It was pro-absolutism, pro-government. Motivations for the scientific revolution are 4 of them. I don't know why. 4 of them. The first one is business purposes. New inventions means more money. Stuff like the mining, metalworking, trade, agriculture, all were industries where you can use scientific discoveries. And you can see this through Jethro Tull's seed drill, this machine that they made in order to make farming more efficient. The second one is government. Making army innovations, making bridges. These were 2 things that the government was especially interested in, especially making army innovations. The English and the French hated each other, wanted to kill each other. They were trying to find the best possible guns they could to kill each other with. Religiously, they wanted to rein in the Puritans back to their religious majority, and they wanted to show how this science was kind of like magic, and they wanted to unradicalize them through using that. And social status, the final motivation, it was rich people trying to be cool by pretending to be scientists or actually being scientists. It was kind of like a flex. Like how owning NFTs was cool at one point, being a scientist would be cool. So that's it for the scientific revolution part. If you are just watching this part of the video, leave a comment if you're confused about anything. I'll try my best to respond. For those of you who decide to press on, I'm glad you'll be joining me. If you're just watching the scientific revolution part of this video, as many of you are, I would recommend you watch the Enlightenment video, which I'm going to be publishing, and it's going to be a great time. We're going to learn a lot about the Enlightenment, and it's going to be similar to this, breaking down all the people. Anyway, enjoy, leave a comment if you're confused about anything. I'll see you. So now for all you cool kids who decided to stick around, or for those of you who have just clicked on the Enlightenment video, welcome. So here's some context of the Enlightenment: popularization of science, skepticism, and travel. So popularization of science, because of Newton, he was really a scientific celebrity. It came into the mainstream, and more people who weren't scientists were allowed to become scientists, or not allowed to become scientists, but were able to become scientists. And the Newtonian world machine became popular. And people were thinking, well, the universe has physical laws and it has scientific laws. Why can't society have laws? Like rules, not law, but rules, like principles. Also, skepticism, people who were skeptical against religion, who didn't really believe it, it was becoming more prevalent. So because you were questioning traditional institutions like the church, you would also be more likely to question other traditional institutions like your government. Monarchy, you'd be more likely to question. And travelers like James Cook, or explorers like James Cook, would travel to other cultures in South Asia, East Asia, these smaller tribal communities, and they would see how they would have more primitive ideas and systems, and they would try to apply it to European. They would see if maybe these things should be applied to European society. Maybe we should have more democratic ideas like they have in some of these other cultures. And more about the Newtonian world machine. Newton created a lot of laws, like the laws of motion and universal gravitation. So the ideas of there being set laws for the entirety of science inspired thinkers to try to make laws for society. If we can make principles for science, we can make principles for society. So they would say something, these thinkers, these Newtonian world machine philosophizers, if you will, they would say, if we can determine the rulebook for science, why can't we determine the rulebook for society? So these thinkers, called philosophers, would set out to find these laws for society instead of science. The first one, Baron de Montesquieu. I always like using this guy on my DBQs and LEQs and SAQs. He's very easy to remember. He is Mr. Separation of Powers. That's how I remember him. And he made this book called The Spirit of the Laws. He said that the government needs 3 branches, executive, legislative, and judicial. And they need this in order to prevent against absolutism and tyranny. He said that each one needed checks and balances on each other to make sure that one doesn't get too powerful. He insulted his French absolutist government, he was a Frenchman, by using Persian as a pseudonym in the Persian letters. So he would say, like, there is Persian tyranny, but he was really talking about French tyranny. And he embodied the ideal of finding laws and natural rights for society in his book, The Spirit of the Laws. And how to remember him? I like saying Mr. Separation of Powers. It's kind of the name that I learned through repetition. But if you don't know that, you can say Montesquieu balance true. Checks and balances, get it? Voltaire, he was another Frenchman, and he insulted French absolutism by simping for the British Constitutional Republic. He said that they had great constitutional rights and a great separation of powers, and he liked the rights of speech, the right to bear arms, petition, and parliamentary supremacy, but mainly speech. And he really liked the Bill of Rights. He wanted France to have that too. He wanted to have that same separation of powers. But one thing that's important to know is that the French absolutists, so any kind of anti-absolutist, anti-French government rhetoric, would be strictly shut down by the government. So these thinkers had to find ways to get around that. Montesquieu found the way to get around that by using Persian as a pseudonym, as an alias. Voltaire found a way to do that by not saying anything about the French government directly, but rather talking about the British. And Voltaire's major works are Letters philosophiques and Letters on the English. He had some progressive views. He was pro-religious toleration, and he was criticized. Well, I'm not saying that it's progressive to be critical of organized religion, but he was critical of organized religion, and he was a deist. And deism is the rational take on Christianity, the rational take on Christianity. It's saying, well, humans can't be supernatural, humans can't be God. So they would be Christians but reject Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior and as miraculous. They would just say that Jesus Christ was a great person but not miraculous or a savior of any kind. They still believed in God though. And his major work on tolerance was Treatise on Tolerance. And he was also pro-woman in the Croix de Femme, pro-woman in the women question. So he was critical, he was satirical, and he was witty. He made this book called Candide, which was very critical of society and of all these old institutions. And he disliked the French, he disliked the Prussians, and he disliked the HRE. He advocated for reasons being supreme, and he was a deist, as I said before. Beccaria. He had progressive and rational views on crime and punishment, and his masterwork is on crimes and punishment. He was against torture because it was cruel and could lead to false confessions. He was against capital punishment because it was unnecessary and irreversible. He argued for proportionate punishment and deterrence and rehabilitation rather than vengeance punishment. So he was saying the objective of punishment is to make less people do the crime. That should be the objective of justice. So he would say lower, less harsh prison sentences and try to make it so that they could adjust back to society when they're done. And he thought that all laws should be public knowledge. There shouldn't be any hidden laws. Diderot, another interesting guy. He made the encyclopedia. It was a collection of knowledge, and it was the exemplification of the Enlightenment or scientific revolution ideal that everything could be discovered, and it was very empirical. He thought that mass consumption would create a more worldly, mass consumption of this encyclopedia would create a more worldly society, and he had Madame Geoffrin, who was a salon owner, which we'll learn about more later, contribute and help out. He was a philosopher, and he had some weird, kind of like existentialist almost ideas. He talked about human behavior, relationships, fate, morality, society, free will, and he was one of like the first French, not French, but Enlightenment philosophers. Not philosophers, but philosophers. And his biggest works on this were Jack the Fatalist and his Mactor and Rameau's Nephew. He was pro-religious toleration, and he was a critic of organized religion. The second intellectual was Jean de Condorcet. He believed that there were 10 stages of history, and the contemporary one, the one in which he was in, was the peak, the bliss of history. Because he thought that reason and science and education is what they needed to reach it. He thought it was the perfect time. And you might be thinking, well, just think about how horrible it was. Peasants died, many of them didn't make it past infancy. But what you have to think about is that his perspective as a privileged noble. Okay, so I am back now. This is an entire day later. Yes, I'm wearing the same shirt. Yes, I have a washing machine. Yes, I have good hygiene. Okay, so we had just finished with John de Condorcet when I left off, and now we're on to Rousseau. So his important thing is that he wrote, he was the creator of the social contract, that idea of the general will, where the people have sovereignty, the people have the right, that they can kind of control their own destiny to a certain point. They have the right to assign a leader, and he believed this is called popular sovereignty, as opposed to the prior idea of a king imposing his will on the populace, or a ruler imposing his will on the populace. This is the populace imposing their will on a leader. So this would look like democracy. That's generally the most achievable way to achieve this social contract. But it could also look like an enlightened absolutist who listens to his constituents, listens to his populace. Besides that, he was a romanticist. I remember him as a capital R romanticist, not as in someone who's like a romantic, relationship, but romanticist. He emphasized emotion, individuality, nature, and these are all romanticist traits. And you don't have to worry about romanticism too much at this stage. Romanticism becomes more important in the next couple of units. And he revolutionized education with his book called Emile. This had a lot of implications, this book. First one was that it revolutionized education. It was changing the idea of child education from being more like strict and old-fashioned to more like it is nowadays, where it's child-centered and it's trying to foster their abilities and talents and passions. And it emphasized learning through experience, through hands-on experience, and the importance of fostering moral and emotional growth, as opposed to just, hammering down ideas. And he fought against women's rights in Emile. In the book, the women it was favorable. It was shown to be favorable to Rousseau that the women were domesticized and that they were educated to be domestic servants to their husbands. He was definitely sexist. He definitely thought that women's role in society was to be domestic and to serve their husbands. And he was a deist. If you don't remember, a deist is the rational explanation of religion, where it believes in Christianity, but it doesn't believe in the more organized church or in Jesus being divine. Adam Smith, for the economy, if any of you guys are taking macro or micro, this is someone who's going to come up. He is the father of capitalism, and you can see this through his work, Wealth of Nations. And capitalism is really the antithesis of mercantilism. Mercantilism says that wealth is finite and can only be attained through the hoarding of gold and silver. And capitalism says that wealth is infinite and it can be created through trade. And that hoarding gold and silver isn't good. That's actually bad for the economy. That's what capitalism says. So he criticized mercantilism, and he said that productivity was the true measure of wealth for a nation, not how much gold and silver they have. And he was a laissez-faire economist. Laissez-faire is, in French, let it be. Just let the economy do its own thing, and the government should be hands-off. And he would say, don't mess with the invisible hand. Let the invisible hand of the economy, the market forces, the stuff which changes the prices and the costs of everything independently in this laissez-faire economy, let that control the economy, not the government. And the extent to which the government should act is to protect private property, to enforce contracts and provide public goods, and also military to keep the country safe. He believed in the division of labor, which would lead to the factory system, which is the microcosmic, if you remember from earlier, microcosmic, the smaller extent of it, and international trade and specialization, which is the macrocosmic version of it. So the factory system, the division of labor is saying that each person that's working on something should be assigned a very specific specialized role which they are best at. So in a pin factory, there should be one person who is making like the sharp part of it, one person who's making the round part of it, one person who's putting it all together. And instead of these pins taking hours to make each, they take minutes, because it takes, instead of having to painstakingly do everything and go from station to station inside of the workplace, you're just passing it along. That's much faster. And this is kind of like international trade and specialization, because instead of each individual nation making their own products, like let's just say today, a car, instead of in the US, the frame of the car, the chassis of the car, the tires of the car, the wheels of the car, all being made in one country, the countries which do it best will do it fastest, and then it'll make everything go along faster and cheaper. And he was inspired by the physiocrats. Physiocrats were an important French economic group, but I don't think they'll come up on your test right now. Holbach. So Holbach was an atheist materialist, and he didn't believe, well, I'm going to go back on the physiocrats real quick. The physiocrats were like Adam Smith and his capitalist ideas. They were anti-mercantilist, But their important thing is that they thought every single industry besides agriculture was sterile, meaning that agriculture is the only industry which can make economic growth, basically. And then Adam Smith lived with these guys for a bit, discussed with them their ideas, and eventually he came up with capitalism. Now, Holbach, he was an atheist materialist, and he didn't believe in anything supernatural. That's the atheist part of his name. And instead, he opted for a belief which everything can be explained with natural processes and laws, and that's materialist, saying that there is no God who is making stuff happen or who has made stuff to happen, but rather everything's just a process of, sometimes I see like something is, I don't know science, but he's just saying that like everything is explained through physics, basically, not through God. And he hated religion, and he thought that religion was what was keeping Europe from making significant human progress. And he believed in determinism, where everything is determined, we have no free will. It's saying that like since the dawn of time, everything is determined and everything is set, and we can't change anything. We don't have any free will. He also believed that most of the ethics, he believed that ethics should be based on reason rather than religion. Also, just a little bit of personal opinion here. This is BS. Anyway, he believed that ethics should be based on reason rather than religion. He thought that we shouldn't like look at the Bible and read God's commandments and say, okay, so this violates this commandment, so we can't do it. Instead, he thought that it should be based on reason. So, like, for example, controversial topic, he would look at something like, birth control, which to people who are using ethics based off religion would be hated because it goes against God's commandments. But to people who are going off of reason, they're saying, okay, well, someone who's using birth control isn't interested in having a child, so if they have a child, then that child could grow up in horrible circumstances since their parents don't want them. And he is the most radical thinker of the Enlightenment. This was the high Enlightenment, if you will. So stuff got more radical. So Protestantism during Enlightenment, there were some changes which were made. Lutherans became much more skeptical of religion, and this was because they couldn't physically observe God, since rationalism and observation and experimentation were very important. If you couldn't see something, then you can't know for certain that it's real. And a lot of Lutherans believed that, so that made them more atheist. But there was a reaction of German pietism, where Lutheranism was revived and people became much more passionate about Lutheranism, and it brought it back to life as a religion. A new religion was created, or a new sect of the religion of Christianity was created. John Wesley, who was an Anglican soapbox preacher, which means someone who would just go out in public and start yapping to anyone who would listen. He wanted to reform the Anglican Church, and he preached to the common people about this. He became very popular with the people, and when he died, his followers, instead of listening to him and trying to reform the Anglican Church, trying to make it better, and staying with the Anglican Church and making it better, instead they opted to create a new one, a Methodist church. And he gained popularity in the UK, US, and Canada, and it's really just defined by the people who made it. It's populist, it's less elitist, as they might describe Catholicism and Anglicanism. Speaking of Catholicism, religion became stronger because of the Catholic Reformation. The changes that were making, like the Council of Trent, were starting to kick in, and they were starting to make some more progress and bring people back into the church. Centralizing powers, like countries, states, whatever, wanted to get rid of the Catholic Jesuit sects, or not sect, but order, because of 4 factors. Jesuits had a lot of political power and authority, which sometimes challenged the political power and authority of these kingdoms. Jesuits had a lot of valuable land and resources, which the kingdoms wanted to get. Jesuits had control over a lot of education, which a lot of secular Enlightenment people didn't like. And Jesuits advocated for natives in colonial disputes, which colonizers didn't like. So the powers, the centralizing powers, were trying to make the Pope disband this order over the course of decades. Over the course of decades, they were trying to get the Pope to disband him. And this culminated in the suppression of 1773, where the Pope gave in and made it so that these Jesuits had to stop being Jesuits. They basically ended the order. The order still exists. It still exists today. I think it was brought back at some point, but it was ended there. So Carl the Femme, is there progress? Yeah, there is a little bit, but still most people believed in domesticity. Like Rousseau in Emile, this was kind of like, if you have a question which is asking about domesticity in Carl the Femme during the Enlightenment, especially if it's an SAQ, go for Rousseau's Emile. This was displaying that people still wanted domesticity en masse, and everyone else basically fell in line with Rousseau's ideas, except for a few people. Diderot. He believed that women had the same intellectual capabilities as men, and he disliked the patriarchy and employed women. And employed women, you might be wondering what that is, but he wrote the encyclopedia, and he brought on Madame Geoffrin, who's a salon owner who we're going to see later, to help him work on it. The next one is Voltaire. He believed in equal rights for men and women, plain and simple, but he still did have some stereotypical beliefs. Like, we gotta remember, at the time, this is 250 years ago. There is still many stereotypes. Women are still believed to be hysterical at times, so keep that in mind. This isn't like modern day Me Too movement kind of feminism. This is, yeah, maybe women aren't dumb. It's kind of like that. And as far as feminists, we had Mary Astell. She's kind of known for just being a feminist. She was probably not going to go up for her test, but it's good to know her. And Mary Wollstonecraft. She was the founder of modern feminism, and her masterwork was The Vindication on the Rights of Women. And it outlines how women are oppressed. Women were oppressed in their society and how it should be changed. Next, we have salon owners. So the salons were these houses where these intellectuals would come together and disperse their ideas. A lot of times it would be, all these philosophers would come over here, and it would be hosted by these rich women with huge mansions, such as Madame Geoffrin, and as I said before, she helped Diderot with the encyclopedia, and Madame de Ford, and she was the biggest host of the salons. So this is an important place. These places are important. This is where all the ideas were spread. This is how it kind of became mainstream, all these ideas. And philosophers would discuss with each other. They would bounce ideas off each other, so you would see a lot of the influences off of each other. As far as art, the art style of this period is Rococo. And it's playful, it's light, it's emotional, sometimes romantic, not romanticist, but romantic. And it shows the bliss of aristocratic life. And it's, you can kind of see it in here. This is all so, like giddy and fun and like, woo! It's stupid. And these would be put on salon walls. And I feel like I had something else to say. Yeah, it's very aristocratic. It's very conceited almost. And just look out for playful, light, emotional. And neoclassicism is something that's going on here, and it's kind of just like Renaissance art, but again in a different time period, like 300 years later after the Renaissance. It's bringing back just like the Renaissance art was bringing back Roman and Greek works, this is bringing back Roman and Greek works again. That's basically all you need to know about it. Baroque, dramatic lighting to display someone's glory, and monarchs in church patronize this kind of art because they wanted to show their own glory. Yes, this is an AI image, but it does do a good job of showing what Baroque art looks like. I mean, look at how the dramatic lighting in the front is so much lighter than the ones in the back, and it's kind of like it's a scene where she's like bursting out. Literature. The modern novel is created, so it's more sensible and comprehensible than previous literature. Popular culture literature, it looks like chapbooks, newspaper, magazines being trial. High culture is poetry and dramas. High culture refers to the literature that aristocrats, upper middle class people would consume. Meanwhile, popular culture is middle class, lower class. Although we still have to remember, literacy is pretty rare at this point. History. So there is a secular view of history still, and instead of authors looking at history and saying, God made this king win, like God made Charlemagne conquer all of that land and create the Holy Roman Empire, they would say, Charlemagne conquered that land in the Holy Roman Empire because he played off of the sentimentalists, old-fashioned Roman systems which were still in place and exploitable. I don't know much about Charlemagne. I'm just giving him an example. That's probably completely wrong. But it's showing a rationalistic, materialistic reason. And there was a lot of Christian blaming for the some atrocities of the past. Some historians started blaming Christianity for unfortunate things like religious wars and oppression of certain religious minorities. And this kind of goes along with Holbach. This whole thing goes along with Holbach, how it's more rationalistic and materialistic, and also how it's like against Christianity. So that's all for the Enlightenment. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you guys, I hope that taught you something. And if you're just watching for the Enlightenment, then go on, maybe consider watching my one on Enlightened absolutism, which I'm about to keep doing if you're staying along for the entire unit. But otherwise, good luck on your test, good luck on your exam. If you have any questions, leave them below. I can't guarantee that I'll answer them. I'll try my best to. Peace. So for those of you who are sticking around in the Unit 4 thing, or for those of you who are just dropping in for Enlightened Absolutism, welcome. This is Unit 4 Enlightened Absolutism. I'm just going to get right into it. So at this time, rulers still wanted to maintain absolute power like we saw in Unit 3, but they also wanted to not get overthrown by these more radicalized Enlightenment thinkers who wanted more rights. So how do they navigate this? What do? They create Enlightened Absolutism. And you might be thinking, what? These are two opposites. Enlightenment is all about the restriction of power from the government, separation of power. And absolutism is all about the centralization of power into one man or woman. So they are opposites, but not really. There's a way to navigate it in order for it to be, in order for there to be a hybrid of it. So let's break it down into two parts. They were both enlightened and absolutists. They were enlightened in a way where they allowed subjects some freedoms and rights, and these would be stuff like toleration. Toleration refers to allowing anyone in your kingdom to practice any religion they want. Having some administrative reforms like improving crime and punishment to be more enlightened, getting rid of torture, getting rid of capital punishment, that kind of stuff, and reducing corruption. And they tried to improve the situation of subjects socially and economically by making social welfare programs and supporting their education. But they were still absolutists. They tried to centralize and ingrain their own power as much as possible. So ways they would do this is expanding essential bureaucracy, making government more streamlined and efficient so they can control more, and retaining absolute power over all branches of government and military. So they would control the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch all by themselves. And they would also try to gain their power abroad by expanding their military and being mercantilists. So the way that I like to think about it is that if you're familiar with geosprite, enlightened absolutism is being absolutists in only political and economics in geosprite. Meanwhile, you're being enlightened in everything else. Religiously, you're allowing tolerance. Intellectually, you might be allowing some more tolerance. Technologically, you're trying to speed up your situation for your country, especially for Catherine the Great in Russia, but we'll get to her later. So there are three enlightened absolutists that we learned about. There are three important ones: Frederick the Great, Frederick II, or the Great, Catherine II, or the Great, and Joseph II. Not or the Great, because he wasn't considered great. Poor Joseph. So first one we're going to be looking at is Prussia, Frederick II, or Great's Prussia. And his father, Frederick William I, he was a centralizer. He kind of walked so Frederick II could run. And he made a strong and centralized bureaucracy and army. He made it very streamlined and made it very efficient. So, like Frederick the William I father, he exchanged privileges from nobles with, he took away privileges from nobles, like not being exempt for taxes, and he exchanged that with giving them positions in the government and the army. And, like I said before, he walked so Frederick could run. He set up the position for Frederick II to be this great, centralizing, expanding leader. So Frederick II, or the Great, he was an enlightened absolutist, the first one we'll learn about, and he made a code of laws. And he made this public. He made it so that everyone would know what's up with the government. He allowed toleration. He made some justice reforms, like getting rid of torture. He enhanced education, and he eliminated torture. He made all laws public, as I said before. He was very interested in the Enlightenment. He didn't even want to be a king when he was growing up. He wanted to do something in the arts, but he was kind of forced to do something kingly. It was just the way that it went. And he was brilliant minds, absolutely brilliant minds. He corresponded with Voltaire. He was very interested in the Enlightenment, and he agreed with a lot of the ideas except the political ones. He still believed that there should be an absolute ruler. He was a patron of the arts, as was said before. He contributed to a lot of Baroque art efforts. He buffed the army up, made it stronger, and expanded Prussia greatly. In the First Silesian War, he took Silesia. This is this strip of land, very wealthy, very important, from the Austrians. And then in the 7 Years' War, he was under an onslaught from all of these European powers trying to take his lands, trying to take Silesia back for the Austrians under this onslaught, and he holds on in a very funny way, as you'll see later. And in the partition of Poland, this map isn't entirely accurate, he would make so that Prussia would control all of this, and this too. So the First and Second Silesian Wars happened from 1740 to 1745. Sorry, this was inaccurate. This should be First and Second Silesian Wars. So in the First and Second Silesian Wars, before this context, the Austrian king is dying, and he doesn't have a male heir. And this is disastrous for him, because, Karl the Femme, women are considered inferior. If you don't have a male heir, then it's going to have to go to a woman. Ugh. So he tried making a male heir, couldn't happen, so he had to give it to his daughter, Maria Theresa. And he knows this will be problematic, because he knows that this could cause a succession crisis. So what he does is he makes this thing called the pragmatic sanction, the pragmatic agreements. where he would go around to all the important kings and emperors in Europe and say, okay, we all agree that Maria Theresa is my heir, and she will inherit my kingdom, my empire, upon my death, right? And everyone would be like, yeah. Everyone would agree except Prussia. Prussia says that they agree, but then they just discard the agreement. And what they do is, as soon as the Austrian king dies, he invades Austria and says, no, there can't be a woman on the throne. I'm going to take Silesia from you now. And he wins. So, for the 7 Years' War, and 7 Years' War / the French and Indian War, they were the same war, but they happened in different theaters. They happened in different locations around the world. The 7 Years' War was fought in Europe. Meanwhile, the French and Indian War was fought in... Excuse me, this is inaccurate. It was fought in Europe and India. Meanwhile, the French and Indian War was fought in America. So, here we go. 7 Years' War. The European part of it had Austria still mad about how they lost to Prussia in the First and Second Silesian War, still mad at how they lost their richest province, their richest area. Maria Theresa wanted to take Silesia back. So, she goes up to Catherine the Great in Russia, who we'll learn about in a second, goes up to France, Louis XV, and gets them to help her invade Prussia and retake Silesia. So Great Britain joins on the side of the Prussians because Great Britain wants French land and also doesn't want France to expand, since France and Great Britain are rivals. Prussia fights valiantly and brilliantly. I think, Frederick II is still in charge at this time. Frederick the Great is still in charge at this time. But he is outnumbered. And he starts losing. And it looks like Russia is about to take Berlin. They are at the gates of Berlin. And then Catherine the Great dies, leaving it to her fanboy heir, who fanboys over Frederick II or Frederick the Great so much that he just asks for a medal and withdraws. He was at the gates of Berlin. He was about to win the war. And as soon as Catherine the Great dies, he just leaves the war. And this allows for Prussia to defend itself and survive, and leads to a stalemate in Europe. Here's the map of it. You can see just how bad this looks for Prussia and Great Britain. All this blue was all going against Prussia, and there was no British support. The British they dipped out. They didn't leave the war, but they were not doing anything in Europe. So the Prussians had to fight off all of these powers. And they won because Russia had a fanboy czar. So the 7 Years' War happened in India too, from 1757 to 1763. Great Britain and France are already fighting each other in America and Europe at this time, so they also expand the war to India since they both want to be the only European power in India. So Britain, because of their superior navy, wins this, takes all the French lands. French and Indian War, remember, this is the same war but in different theaters, different parts of the world. They fight each other in the Americas. And as I say here, Great Britain and France has beefing over America. George Washington, our president, the same George Washington, starts the war as a British officer by attacking the French in French lands. So this starts a war that goes on for 9 years, and the British win. They take all this land that used to be French lands, and they win. And there was a partition of Poland. Poor Poland. They always get bullied throughout this entire curriculum. They get bullied many times. So Russia and Austria, at this time Catherine the Great and Maria Theresa, both wanted to expand into Poland and the Balkans, but they were probably going to go to war since they were both trying to expand into the same lands. So Frederick the Great sees this and says, he wanted Poland, And he said, guys, you both want to expand, right? But the place where you want to expand, you're going to fight each other over if you try to expand into there. So, why don't we all just agree to expand into Poland? And everyone agrees. And they split Poland up. Austria. As you can tell, they had a lot of stuff going on at this time. So they never end up becoming enlightened because there's too many nationalities and it's hard to make changes for all of them. One reform which one nationality would like oftentimes the Austrians and the other nationalities would like it, but then the Hungarians wouldn't like it because they're more traditional and conservative. So it's hard to become enlightened because of that. Maria Theresa had a rough start following the First and Second Silesian Wars. She was very Catholic and she was anti-Enlightenment. She made the administration more efficient, and she tried taking Silesia back in the 7 Years' War, and she loses, as we learned about before. So Joseph II comes to power after Maria Theresa dies, and he is an enlightened absolutist. And I just want to clarify that enlightened absolutist doesn't mean that you're a successful enlightened absolutist. It means that you want to be one, like you have the ideals of one. So he's very influenced by Enlightenment ideals, opposite of his mother, and he makes a lot of reforms and he tries to centralize a lot. His reforms, he abolished serfdom outright. Insane. Great, but it's insane. So unprecedented, so unexpected. And he also made an enlightened legal code, which was more fair and made there was no death penalty. Made it so that every citizen under the law was equal. And he made religious toleration for every religion. As far as centralization goes, he strengthened central authority, he made German the official language, and he expanded control over education. He miserably failed in everything. It's quite tragic. And it happens, he made those changes way too fast. It happened way too soon, and many of the reforms ended up getting rolled back. Basically, every change that he made got rolled back. And this is his grave. His grave said, "Here lies a man who, despite his best intentions, was unsuccessful in all his endeavors." I feel him. The Dutch Republic, it peaked in the 1500s, 1600s. We're in the 1700s now. And they got outcompeted. They couldn't industrialize. They couldn't adapt to the fact where trade in Southeast Asia wasn't everything now, so they got outcompeted by the larger nations. Great Britain, they had their glorious revolution last unit. They had their parliament, their Bill of Rights, and this made it so they had no absolutism. So, but they were enlightened because they had a parliament. They had a good separation of powers. So, parliament says, sit down, king. I'm the real king now. Not actually claiming that they were king, but they were claiming that they were in charge. But there was some corruption in parliament and in some of the courts. So the Hanoverian dynasty was established, and they were Germans. They were from the British-owned part of Germany called Hanover. And they were kind of just like, Parliament, you got this. I'm just going to chill, and you can take care of everything. And as I said before, England was enlightened but not absolutist. Poland, it was weak, decentralized, not absolutist. It was ran by the nobles. It was very weak, so they just got partitioned. Russia had Peter III, who was young, incompetent, lazy, and he married Catherine, soon to be the Great, at this time just a queen, who didn't actually have any power. But Catherine sees how young, incompetent, and lazy he is, and overthrows him. And she was pro-Enlightenment. She noticed that the nobles were anti-Enlightenment, so what she did is that she distracted Russia into 50 provinces and had little districts inside of each of the provinces and sent the nobles off to rule these places, and therefore weakening their power. she had a charter of nobility, which was like a cabinet, a group of people who would advise her and discuss the reforms that she wanted to make. And she made this thing called instruction, which was a plan that she had to implement all the Enlightenment ideals that she had. And in this, she questioned serfdom, torture, and capital punishment. She was expressively and explicitly pro-equality of all people under the law. And she dealt with the Pukichels Rebellion, which had Cossacks, who were these nomads, join up with some peasants in revolting against the government, and it failed. She expanded into Poland and towards the Black Sea. France. Looks like I didn't add in a slide for this, but basically France was going through some hard times. They had Louis the 15th ascend to the throne, and he was lazy, decadent, and much like his son Louis the 16th, who would soon ascend to the throne, didn't really care for governing too much and just partied a lot. And they were experiencing economic difficulties. They had some bad harvests. Also, because of these, they were like lagging behind the rest of Europe. Lots of anti-absolutist work going out there because of people like Voltaire and Montesquieu. And the government was under severe questioning. They were becoming more poor and poor because like all the money that they were taxing was just being spent on partying in Versailles. And they also had economic difficulties because they lost so much land in India and in Quebec, so that made them have some economic difficulties. Here's some quick facts. Armies grow in size throughout all of Europe. Demographic-wise, there was steady population growth because of bigger access to food. There were less famines and less deaths due to starvation, and the bubonic plague died down. There was a higher birth rate overall because of more access to food and just more people being able to survive for longer, and lower birth rates in aristocracy. Marriage becomes a little bit more romantic based instead of just being all arranged, and marriages are taking place later in life, which handicap the birth rate a little bit. And primogeniture is being challenged. Primogeniture is making it so that the firstborn son of a family inherits everything and is like the favorite child. Jobs-wise, urbanization, there's less farm workers because of the agricultural revolution, which we'll get to later. And there's more cottage industry workers. And cottage industry is a textiles industry where these capitalists would go into these rural homes and say, hey, do you want to supplement your income as a farmer by making some stuff for me? And they'll be like, yeah. And then the capitalists will give them all these tools to make these textiles. And there are more merchants, artisans, and shopkeepers as international trade increases. Economically, capitalism is reigning supreme at this point. Not reigning supreme, but it is increasing in prominence. There are public and private banks, credit paper notes. Local life is changing due to mercantilism and industrialization, and port cities and stuff around trade routes. Those cities are becoming larger and more rich. And mercantile empires like the Great Britain and the Netherlands are doing quite well for themselves. Agricultural Revolution. So this refers to the large change in the agriculture of Europe, and it happened for a few reasons. Age of exploration. There was a lot more land, a whole 2 continents worth of land where they could farm, and new crops from this new world like potatoes, tomatoes, tobacco, which are great. And I think I explained this before, but they revolutionized the gastro economy, the food economy for Europe, because specifically potatoes, because the way that it was beforehand, potatoes weren't introduced to Europe yet. They just grew wheat. And what wheat does is that it eats up the nutrients in the soil so that it could grow. So to make sure that all the nutrients don't get completely destroyed, what they do is let the fields lie fallow, let the fields not have anything planted in it and just lay there not producing anything for a season. And then the next season, put wheat on it. And then the season after that, let it fly fallow, so on and so on. This is inefficient. But it's what they had to do so that they don't kill off all the nutrients. But what potatoes do is that it replenishes the nutrients as it's being grown, which is insane. It means that you can always grow potatoes, or what you can do is grow wheat and then grow potatoes, grow wheat, then grow potatoes, and it's insane. It makes it so that Ireland is basically dependent on potatoes because it's that efficient and that easy to grow. And farming technology from the scientific revolution, such as Jethro Tull's seed drill, makes farming much easier, take less people, take less time, and a better climate because the little ice age effects are not as bad. If you're not familiar, the little ice age is a period of time where everything was colder. It was about 3 centuries long, and everything was colder. But now this is becoming better. It's becoming not quite as bad. Some of its effects are there's more crops, and there's less people who have to work in the fields. And this culminates in the Enclosure Acts, where landowners are enclosing communal fields into small private property, and people are forced to urbanize or pay for the fields. And this makes it so more people are going to the cities, less people have to work on the farms, because, at that point, the landowners didn't need as many people working on the fields because of stuff like the seed drill. So what they did is say, get out of here, you're not contributing anything, you're just standing around not doing anything for me, go. And this is capitalism. And there's more pasture land in America, which means there's more meat widely available. Specifically, European cattle went to America, and the climate there was perfect for them. So they just kept growing and growing and growing to the point where there are cows everywhere. I mean, if you live in America, well, everyone here does, you're taking an AP course, but if you're living in a part of America where you see cows sometimes, I mean, they're perfect for America. So there's much more meat available. And the cottage industry, which is also capitalism, had people working on textiles at home. Because, if you're not working as many hours, or if you're not working at all for these farmers, you need more money. You need to find ways to make money. So what some of those people did is start working for the cottage industry. Socially, my favorite stuff. Villages, these were little mini governments, and village elders kept an eye on everyone. They were looking at the young people who may do immoral stuff like fornication, and they were kind of like the authority, they were the police. And they collected taxes and kept up infrastructure for, not the village elders, but the many governments of the village collected taxes from their villagers and kept up infrastructure, made infrastructure for the village. And the church was the dominant institution. It was like the center of the village. And it maintained public orders to build the village many governments. It also collected tithes, which were a lot of crops which the villagers collected to give to the church. But then how it happens is that the nobles just stole it instead of giving it to the church. Nobility had a lot of privileges and advantages. It held high positions in military and public office, and it also used education to enforce that. They used education as a justification for being noble. They had unfair treatment, meaning they were treated well, not unfairly. They were treated unfairly, but they were treated well, not poorly. And they had lots of money. England and Western European landowners tended to lease land out because of the Enclosure Acts and no serfdom. And Eastern Europe had serfdom or feudalism, where serfs were tied to the lands. And court society was on the come up. Versailles, specifically, had so much partying and, just decadency that the nobles just stayed there all the time so that kings could take power. They just let the nobles party so that the kings could actually run the country. And travel is a major activity for nobles because, especially the younger ones who are like trying to get an education, trying to see the worlds. Human geography. So there's some urbanization, but most Europeans still live in rural areas. Townspeople are a minority, and the town is the alpha over the villages. It's rich, it gets dues from the villages surrounding it, and it's dirty and overcrowded. It has upper middle class people in towns like bankers, lawyers, and merchants. It has lower middle class people in towns or bourgeois, shopkeepers and artisans, and there's lots of beggary and prostitution. Before, the idea for specifically village life was that we have to help out beggars because we're all Christian, we all believe in God, and we're all brothers and sisters. Like, if your brother, sister, sibling, whoever were to, get reduced to the point of having to live on the streets, you would bring them in. And that's the same idea that they had before. But now, because of secularization and rationalization, they said, well, if we just feed the poor, then they're just going to realize that they can survive while being poor and not doing anything, and then stay poor. But that, of course, is not true. And that is it. That is the unit. This was the longest unit I've ever recorded. I'm sure you're clicking off the video right away. If you have any questions, please let me know. Understand that I am a student too. It might take me a while to respond, or I might not respond at all. The earlier you do it, the better, because remember, I'm also studying for APs and unit tests. So, thank you. And good luck on your test or exam.